the best band Australia's ever produced. Bar none, full stop, the end.
Fuck, I wish that band was still around, man. Holy shit. The greatest grooves and the best creative output I've ever heard in an Australian band ever.
Fucking outstanding bands. They blew us away every single night.
Instrumental rock from some dimension that's got colours you've never seen before.
Incredible songwriting, incredible performing. Dan's approach to guitar changed how I think about the instrument forever. And we love him.
Meniscus, phenomenal live band. Absolutely incredible live band. Taught us so much on tour about being a live band and touring, and they work fucking hard.
It's so meditational. It's kind of hypnotizing. Especially when, of course, Marty came in doing visuals with them as well, and it's just so beautiful.
Meniscus is great. Saw them live as well. Great, man. Great musically, really awesome time signatures, like just great vibe all throughout, really good.
I remember seeing them at the Bald Face Stag when it was the Bald Face Stag and just being like, well, fuck me. People can really do this shit, huh? Yeah, wow, they blew me away.
Australia's sleeper best band, I reckon. Meniscus are Australia's sleeper best band.
Meniscus, wow, what a powerful live band. My ears hurt pretty much every single time I saw them live, but I was never upset about that pain.
I don't think I've ever seen a young band playing some of their first shows come out of the gate with such a big sound, with such like precision and polish and huge kind of, you know, showmanship and a really tight performance.
Whenever I watch Dan playing, I kind of think of his guitar's like some tiger that's attacking him and he's trying to like force it off his body. Like that's kind of the best description I can come up with. But all at the same time, he's making beautiful music. This guy is like able to perform, jump around like crazy, headbang like crazy, and yet everything is so precise that's coming out. Like he's being super rough, smashing his guitar around, yet all the guitar notes I'm hearing coming out are like beautifully precise. And you're almost like, is this guy miming? But no, he's just like a wizard with reverb and delay.
Sounds like a white landscape post-rock. I like it a lot.
Yeah, because in high school, we listen to post-rock a lot. Meniscus make us think of the time we love post-rock.
And they do the shows with VJ, and the VJ is so beautiful. It's like the image of the universe. So for me, it's universe.
Some artists that come along that really do inspire you, that inspire your own musical creativity, that you really look up to. And I remember seeing Meniscus for the first time, playing at Manly Fish shows, and a three-piece with this wall of sound, and that just blew my mind. Like the way that they could just fill the room up with huge, beautiful noise, and there were only three of them.
I remember someone described them as Echo the Dolphin Rock. Once, but
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we can beat that.
No, but yeah, huge. Yeah. That's the thing that immediately comes to mind for Meniscus. Huge.
Like just the sound was great. You know, I mean, I love it just was such a pro sound. I remember the mix was always, you know, obviously you can say the mix is responsible by the in-house engineer a lot of the time, but you could tell that Meniscus were a band that really took seriously their so not just the sound of the venue, but like the tones of their instruments as well. And I just remember they nailed it all the time. Yeah.
Meniscus have been massive players in the post-rock scene in Australia for a really long time too, and we love them.
Dan and his approach to guitar playing literally shifted the axis under my feet in terms of like what was possible out of guitar. He played the instrument in a way I'd never seen before. I grew up on like watching great guitarists play, like guys like Metallica, like James Hetfield, who was an incredible guitarist, but they all played guitars in ways that they played really well in ways that I sort of knew. And then I saw Dan Oreskovich play, and it was like nothing else I'd ever seen. His pedal board was just as much of a form of his expression as were his hands, but his hands weren't always on the fretboard; they were on his volume knobs. Like everything was connected in ways that I'd never seen, and it all joined to create such a staggering wall of noise that wasn't just like big, but it was beautiful. He was incredibly emotional, but also incredibly technical in what he did. And he used the instrument in a way to create an emotional world that I found utterly compelling and which totally changed how I saw the instrument and how I saw what was possible out of guitar playing. Not to mention that Alison and Duncan as a rhythm section were just incredible. And the combined force of the three of them felt so much larger than a three-piece had any right to be, and so much larger than any three-piece I'd ever see again. Something really special was happening in those small rooms in Sydney around that time when you had these bands who were just so exciting and had so much to share, all clustering around these little rooms in this little scene. And I was lucky enough to be young enough to be there for it. And I'm very grateful of that. And I'm reminded of how special it was to have those small rooms. And I hope that whatever happens in Sydney in the future, that we get those kinds of small rooms back and we get that kind of scene back where you can just go out on a Friday night and see a lineup of bands and get your absolute like head blown off by what to this day might still be the greatest live act I've ever seen. That would be Meniscus in that era.
My name's Daniel, I'm the guitarist and founding member of the band Meniscus.
My name is Alison, I'm the bass player in Meniscus.
And what kind of music do you play?
It's always a difficult question to answer, but I think I've boiled it down to it's an instrumental rock band. Yeah, Meniscus started in the early 2000s. It was myself, bass player Alison, and the drummer Duncan Wilson, originally from New Zealand, but had been living in Australia for a little while. We had, Alison and I had been playing together for a while, and we were sort of doing things under, under sort of various names, although we didn't actually do anything that we didn't play any shows or anything like that. But we'd put together a body of material of about 4 or 5 songs, instrumental songs. The idea that potentially this could be something that we could get a vocalist for and sort of build it that way. So we started putting out ads for a drummer, and yeah, we got the old Trading Post ads. I don't know if anyone still uses that or if that exists anymore. But yeah, we got Duncan on board, and then we started this relentless jamming and writing period of probably about 1.5 years, where we rented this tiny little space above a automotive works thing. I don't know, it was just one of those multi-story where it was like mechanic, woodworking guy, mechanic, and then us on the top, and we were crammed in this tiny little room in Manly Vale, and we basically 2 nights a week minimum for about 4 to 5 hours each time we would just sit there and press record at the start and play non-stop. And then, the spaces in between, we'd just be sitting there and just listening to like 4 or 5 hours worth of jamming and just trying to find bits that we liked. And so that went on for about 1.5 years, and then we'd put together enough music to be able to play a show with, and we booked our first show, and it would have been early 2005 at a venue that no longer exists. I think it's called the Marquee Club, Camperdown, I think it was. And we played our first show there, and yeah, it was one of those, band gets on stage with no vocalist and people are looking at each other going, what's going on here? And But no, that was a great first introduction to playing. And I think because we've been playing together for so long in this tight little room, I felt that we were pretty much a tight unit right from the get-go, and it was just a matter of getting over the initial sort of performance anxiety that everyone seems to go through. But yeah, from there we maintained that way of working. We two nights a week minimum, and that was religious. We did that for years until we recorded our first record. So currently the band consists of myself on guitars, Alison on bass, and Alex O'Toole on drums, and Marty Wong, who does our live projection visual stuff. So originally it was myself and Alison and a different drummer, Duncan Wilson, who stayed with us up until around about 2008, 2009, and then we had Cameron Brennan join in on drums for about a 5-year period up to about 2013, 2014, and then Alex has been the drummer since then. It's funnily enough, like we consider Marty, you know, I mentioned before he does the visuals, like considered him an equal part of the band in terms of how we represent ourselves on stage and what we try and deliver to the audience. But for many people, no one actually knows anything about him because he's never on stage. He's sort of tucked away somewhere, usually by the sound desk, you know, with his laptop working away. So he's sort of almost like, you know, one of the unsung members of the band that never gets the stage sort of spotlight, but he's very much there, and he takes a very active role in all of sort of, you know, what we try and do, even if he's not a musician writing music in the band.
Marty's been a friend of ours for a long time. He's a great guy. He's always, you know, he's one of those guys that always has your back. You know, he's a hard worker, but he's also a lot of fun to have around. Always, you know, is there to have a joke. But when it comes to playing a show, he's just on it in the venue, just sorting out what he needs.
The work that Marty had to do because he was so behind the scenes, he'd often be rocking up to venues, you know, armed with his projector under one arm and a screen under the other, and a lot of the time he'd have, you know, people at the venue, where it'd be the stage manager or whoever, just sort of looking at him like, what are you doing here? And, you know, for him, he was always like having to justify his existence because there weren't many bands doing what we were doing at the time in terms of, you know, lugging up all this projector equipment into venues. And more often than not, we were the support band. So, you know, they were just looking at us like, you're the support band, what the hell are you doing bringing in like screens and projectors and stuff? And obviously Mike Birdsrobe's been there more or less since the start in various capacities along the years. So I'd say he's been the other constant.
It is a boys' club, but I've been really privileged to be playing with such amazing people. I've never had an issue. Everyone's been really supportive. It really is like a big family. It would be nice to see more females, but I understand that it might not just be their thing. Yeah. But I've also had the support of Dan and Marty and all of our bass drummers, and I'm just a lucky girl that's, you know, included. But
so more than included, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think maybe that has helped as well.
Yeah. That came from, so Duncan, the drummer, he came up with that name, and we had a bunch of different ideas, and I honestly can't remember any of the other ones, and that one was definitely the best one out of a lot of them. But the thing that attracted me to it, even though the name itself I didn't quite like the phonetics of it. There's something about it that I thought, this doesn't sound like, I don't like saying that word. But the connotation and the meaning behind it was this idea of, you know, the surface tension of water. And we just thought this is just a really cool concept, because we were writing music that we felt at the time had a lot of sort of natural flow and tension to it, and we would allow passages just to run for a long period of time and really play on that kind of ambient sound, and then have those moments of tension where things get, you know, much heavier. And so we thought it's just a perfect sort of metaphor for it. So yeah, it was one of those ones that once we heard the name and the meaning behind it, ooh, that makes perfect sense. But then little did we know that we then had to bat away 15 years of questions about knees. And I tore my meniscus when I was running. Like every time I hear your band, I think about my knee injury, and that was hilarious. And like I'd never even. I mean, I knew that there was a part of the body called the meniscus, but I didn't think it was such a thing that was. I thought the curvature of water in a test tube was more known than like knee anatomy. So I was just surprised that most people just go, "Why are you naming your band after like something in your knee?" Early days, it would have been, I guess, sort of as I was finishing high school, late 90s, early 2000s, I was heavily into bands like Tool, a lot of other metal bands as well. But like my sort of diet of music growing up and what got me really into guitar was bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, so all that kind of 90s rock stuff. And then, yeah, discovered a bit more of the prog element later on. But yeah, it's probably that sort of group of bands mainly. That sort of kicked off the Meniscus sort of tangent. When the band had just sort of started to write music and sort of start thinking about the idea of playing shows, the biggest one at the time would have been Cog. I started going to their shows back end of maybe 2001. I was still in high school. I'm in year 12 at that point. And on a Wednesday night, I heard through a friend that on Wednesday nights they were playing at the Excelsior Hotel in Surrey Hills. I would beg my mum to let me out on a school night so I could go and catch a train into the city and walk up from Central Station. And back then there were no ID checks at the door, and I must have had just enough bum fluff on my chin to pass as an 18-year-old. So yeah, I'd go in on a Wednesday night, watch them play. Yeah, I just remember walking in and not knowing what to expect because this was all, word of mouth back then. There were no online reviews. There were no Instagram reels of anything. It was just come and see this band. They're going to blow you away. And yeah, walking in and seeing this like really low ceiling at the back room of the Excelsior Hotel, and there's all Chinese lanterns hanging everywhere, and yeah, and they'd always have a different sort of guest appearance each night. One of the nights I went, they had a guy in the background with a canvas, and he was painting while the band was performing. And another night they had someone playing violin, and yeah, I just remember it absolutely blowing my head off. Like it was the loudest band at that point that I'd seen in such close proximity. Like they were playing like it was a stadium show, and it was in this little 5 by 6 meter room or something. It was tiny. And yeah, I just, the impression that left was massive. And when I got back home, it was like, I need to get to a point where my band can play on that stage and do that thing, because that thing is awesome. So from a musical inspiration, that was certainly there, but also just from their insanely high work ethic. Like I think during that period, they were doing shows in Sydney on the Wednesday night. They were driving down that same weekend to play shows in Melbourne, and I think they were doing that back to back for weeks and weeks on end. So, they sort of lay down the benchmark for what I believed you needed to do to be a successful live band in this country, and that means just putting in the miles, and putting in the hours, and get in front of as many faces as you can. So we definitely took that as a massive source of inspiration. That was sort of the ethos of the band at the start, and that's what kicked off that. How we approached rehearsal, how regularly we got together and worked on things, and just kept playing the same things over and over again to get really tight. And yeah, Cog was a massive part of the inspiration to go down that path.
And influences for Meniscus these days, or the years gone by since then?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you can't, you have to say you're influenced by what's going on around you, but it's also, for me personally, it's been a lot of electronic music, surprisingly, just things like Massive Attack and, any kind of music that sort of plays more with things like textures and, where, there's a lot of that kind of repetition, but sort of evolving repetition and stuff like that. And I think that's where Meniscus drew a lot of influences from over the years, where we sort of tried to build songs that were very much like starting with some form of a loop or a repetition and then building on it and progressing. And I don't know if how many other bands would, if they would describe this the same way, but we sort of started thinking we were the only bands doing this. And so we were looking around bands around the scene at the time, sort of like early 2000s, and it was sort of the dying deaths of the sort of new metal bands, and they were sort of starting to sort of, you know, fade away. And we were rocking up to these gigs, and it was like a five band bill playing in some tiny little bar in the city somewhere, and you know, every band had like the Mesa Boogie stacks and like the vocalist with the growls, and everything was just like really intense. And we just rocked up with no singer and played lots of like really weird sort of ambient stuff, and then wall of sound noise. And we thought, we are so the only band doing this. Like, we're incredible. And then yeah, then we started playing shows, and we started getting like, oh, have you heard of this band? Have you heard of this band? And no, I haven't. And then like I'd meet people and I'd see their band, I'm like, oh, we're totally not the only people doing this stuff. Like, there's heaps of awesome bands doing this. So yeah, like I think yeah, it all just sort of converged, I think, for us.
Was that a positive thing for you to know that there was other bands doing the same thing, or was it a bit of a case of, oh, we're not so special, or we're not as special as we thought we were?
Yeah, it's a good ego check. I mean, you do start off thinking that you know, everyone's so passionate about what they do. And to them, it's like the most important thing. And you have to remember that there's many other people whose creative output is just as important to them, and it's their baby, right? So you view everything as special, right? And you know, parents would do that with their own children. So, you know, yes, it was a case of, yeah, we're clearly not that special. But I think to flip that around, a healthy sense of competition is really, really good. And I think that if you're able to look around in the landscape and see what other people are doing, you're like, you know what, they're doing something that's so far beyond what I thought was possible. That's amazing, and that's a source of inspiration, and it makes you then step up and go, you know what, like, I want to try this now, and I want to try this now. So like, there's this sort of cross-pollination of ideas, and everyone just sort of the level raises collectively, I think. So it's a good discovery, as much as it is humbling in the very beginning. So.
For me, Meniscus has always been a band that we looked up to, and who always impressed us from way back in the very early days. As soon as we saw them play at like the Excelsior Hotel back in 2008, I think, we were awed by them, and they kind of seeing them do what they did pushed us to really like try and, you know, up our game and get that good. I don't think we did, but they were always like a role model in a way.
Yeah.
I guess it was good playing at the Annandale before that got turned into something else.
Some of the early ones. But
yeah, they were like, I'd always wanted to play at the Annandale, as you know, as well as the Excelsior. But yeah, playing the Annandale was one of my first achievements, and then luckily got to do that before it got changed, because so many other amazing Australian bands also,
I could probably speak to some of the shows we did around that time, but generally speaking, it was a real mix, and we weren't involved with Robe at that point. So, like I said before, like it was really, we thought we're the only band doing this sort of stuff. So it was a lot of bands that were sort of in that kind of new metal space. Then there was like your classic rockers. And I think a lot of there was a bit of that kind of garage rock sort of stuff that had become pretty popular around that time as well. And then we were mixed in with, like pop punk bands and stuff like that as well. So it was a real eclectic mix. I mean, we were definitely on the far end of I guess any sort of collective idea of a genre for what was going on. Yeah, I mean, we were definitely the only band with no vocalist, and we were frantically trying to set up video screens and things like that so we could play projectors and play images while we played and stuff. So yeah, we definitely felt at the time and we're like, there's no one else doing this that we know of. And it was also a bit challenging as well because people would come up to me like, oh, I really like your music, but like where's your singer? Like, is your singer not well, or do you need a singer? I've got a mate that's like a really good singer and that sort of stuff. So that was a lot of the early shows for at least the first probably year and a half to 2 years. I think, yeah, I mean, we definitely toyed with the idea of, should this be something that we should, I guess, tailor to what we perceive to be what general people want to listen to. But that idea was quickly abandoned because the enjoyment factor would severely plummet if I started thinking that way or if the other guys started thinking that way. And we certainly wanted to not be limited in the sense of what we were trying to do, and we just wanted to let it sort of organically play out in the rehearsal space and just see what we could create. And so we never brought riffs in or never brought half-finished song ideas into the space. It was always about set up and play. And that we maintained that for a really, really long time. And
initially, when we first started, we were able to have the freedom of time to work on pieces together collectively, but now it's more just kind of Dan's around the computer and he's, belting out tunes and recording, and because I'm also hearing them as well, like he'll show me a bass line, but I've already heard the full song, like going, from the beginning. So it's hard for me to then kind of think of a new bass line because they always fit so well. But then when we start playing it, we might change a few little things and just get a new feel to it, and I might put my nuance to it. But yeah, it's definitely evolved throughout time.
Going back to the idea of being so unique, one of the things that I was noticing as well as a lot of the time was I'd hear bands and I'd hear the instrumental introduction, and I'd go, wow, this is awesome. And then like the bass would come in, the drums come in, and I'm like, okay, this absolutely sounds incredible. And then the singer would start and I'd be like, no. And not that they were a bad singer, but because the atmosphere and the emotion that they established with the music was sort of took me down one path. But when the vocals started, I was like, oh, okay, they're going for something completely different. And now all of a sudden, now I'm like, oh, I have to, process these lyrics and what do they mean, and that was incredibly distracting. And so that for me to write music that didn't have that element in it at all was almost liberating in that sense. I didn't have to worry about making space for vocals or worrying about thematically what was going to be covered from a lyric perspective. So just letting the chords and the melodies and the beats that we create just sort of tell that story, and then it just becomes more of a, if you like the vibe, you're going to be into it, and if you don't, you're not. And I think that was a really really easy way to sort of become comfortable with what we were trying to do.
eye opener for me was like their music was so good, and like the first EP with the mosquito on it, In the Absence of I think that's what it's called. And I remember buying it, and it got sent by Dan. I was like, whoa, like this guy sent me his record. Like just back then, not understanding like the industry and like how small bands can be, and I thought they'd be like, just the quality of their output didn't match where they were at. Like, yeah, they were sensational. Like, monumental band, monumental.
We used producer Ash McLeod, who's actually had no experience with anything like what we were doing. He does pop music, and very, very slick pop music. So for him to do something that was low tuned guitars and low bass and like very busy drums and all that sort of stuff, I think was a bit of a learning exercise for him as well. So yeah, but we got in there and we didn't record to a click or anything. We just kind of just played as we did in the rehearsal room, and yeah, probably it's definitely the quickest thing we've done since, like, the first one was the quickest. We spent the least amount of time on it because it was already so fleshed out from the beginning.
But that was just so raw. That was like, the album was just us in the room, literally nutting out each song together. It was just, those riffs were like kind of hard riffs.
Pretty much all they're ready to go. I did do some extra stuff in the studio environment, and that's always that's been a conscious decision, and I've always maintained that with every record that we've done, is that we have a set amount of we have the set songs, we have the set structures, we have everything nailed out, we're rehearsed, we go in, we lay down that foundation, and then when it comes to looking at things like the overdubs, then I start going, I want like a really mental lead line here, I want this there, and it's something that I would never pre-rehearse. I'd always want that level of spontaneity just there. And sometimes, you do it and you'd be like, no, that's terrible. But like most of the time, 1 or 2 takes, just throw something on there. Because we're afforded the ability to do that. I mean, in a live environment, it's a 3-piece rock band. We use loopers and stuff, but there's only so many layers you can add before it becomes just an incoherent mess. But in the studio, you can sort of carve spaces out in songs and go, you know what? I know that there's an implied melody here because I think it in my head when I play the chords, but it'd be good to actually just have that melody there for the listener as well. Yeah, it was a case of definitely well rehearsed. Go in, smash it all out, and then spend a week or 2 in the overdub stage, just kind of finding pockets of space to add things to.
Yeah, it's just like really vivid memories. Like it's still just seared into my mind. Being in the Excelsior Hotel and hearing Pilot and just like feeling such excitement, and such connection with that music. I think those guys have several times captured some lightning in a bottle, and it's pretty amazing stuff.
Duncan leaving the band was, I mean, for a while he was sort of starting to question, why he was doing what he was doing. Am I enjoying it as much as I used to, and things like that. And we were still keeping up a pretty relentless rehearsal schedule. Even when we weren't writing music, we were still getting together and playing. And we were doing that, you know, in some part because, you know, I have a pretty relentless drive when it comes to playing music, and I was always, like, no matter what, just be doing something. You know, even if you just get in and rehearse your old songs, just do that. You know, and yeah, I think Duncan was just sort of getting to that point where he was sort of like, he was sort of getting to that stage in his life where he was sort of like, oh, I don't know if music is just one of those childhood fantasies, and now that I'm, you know, I'm a bit older and, you know, hit 30s and sort of started questioning it, you know, is it all that, and do I ever want to keep doing this? So, and you know, we were still very much like, hey, we want to keep this machine rolling along, and but at the same time, you know, there was no point in trying to push people if they weren't as interested or as willing to sort of sacrifice as much of you know, their personal life as you need to, I guess, to keep up that kind of regimented schedule. So it was certainly an amicable decision, and there was absolutely no hard feelings, and still consider Duncan one of my closest mates. So, but you know, that did make things quite challenging for us, because being an instrumental band, I feel that the individual band members' influence on the sound can be a lot more, and I'm struggling to think of the word, there's a lot more personality and there's a lot more of their fingerprint in the songwriting. And I think if you write music that's in a lot of other genres where it's very vocal forward, and you're writing songs with, you know, with a clear sort of, you know, this is the vehicle, this band is the vehicle for this song, and we're doing it to support this. And I find that, you know, band members can be a lot more interchangeable in those environments. But I find in our genre, I think with, yeah, that fingerprint element, and Duncan had such a unique style where he was a right-handed drummer that drummed like a left-handed drummer. And, you know, he sort of had this open-handed style and about 50 billion cymbals. And it just meant that anyone that would try and play those songs, it immediately didn't sound anything like it, because it was almost just like a biomechanical thing, like the human, like if you're a, you know, overhand drummer, you're just not going to play the same way. So we were, you know, getting other drummers to come in and you know, jam with, just to sort of see, you know, how we would go about replacing, and it just wasn't happening. And it was really, really disheartening, because I was like, this is such a hard thing, because, you know, we felt that what Duncan was bringing to the band was a unique thing, and it was going to be irreplaceable. So I guess that sort of forced us to sort of stay quiet for a little while, and I started focusing a little bit more on just writing music for myself, and or even just sort of writing a collection of ideas and just sort of keeping them there. So once we get back up and running, you know, we could have a bit of material to springboard off from. We got Cameron on board. He came and auditioned with us, and probably out of all the drummers that we auditioned, he I guess made the most effort to preserve what we thought was the most important aspects of the songs, and he really pushed himself outside of his comfort zone to try and deliver that for us. And not only that, he himself was quite a driven individual, and also really just really fun and easy to get along with. And you know, he was a lot more orderly, and which was a really good juxtaposition to my absolute chaos, and you know, might sort of speak on one tangent then just sort of shoot off somewhere else. And he was really good at sort of keeping track of ideas and doing things like, you know, some of the stuff that we say Mike's really good for, and that's like the goal setting and sort of planning things out. So he not only was able to sort of pick up where Duncan left off, but he was also able to become a more integral part of the band in terms of how we manage the day-to-day and sort of the unsexy stuff about being in a band. We definitely thought about putting Meniscus to bed, and particularly because, you know, we were all pretty young still as well. You know, all of us in around our early 20s, and it's that first love effect, right? Your first sort of real band that you put together, and that's something that you're super passionate about. When an element of that breaks away, it's a little bit heartbreaking, and you you sort of wonder, okay, well, can we keep doing this? Is it worth doing it? Or have we lost whatever the spark was that got us, really got us so close together as a unit to begin with? And so yeah, we definitely thought about just sort of packing it in and just moving on to other things. And but I mean, that was never in any way that was ever going to stop me at that point in time from doing something. It was never going to derail the whole thing in that sense. But we made the decision to keep going because I started to experiment with song ideas and ways of writing that were starting to become exciting for me again. And Cameron was really good with that stuff because he was just so adaptable to whatever I threw at him. I said, I'm thinking about doing this, I'm thinking about doing this. And then he'd come into the room and be like, oh, I've dug out this, I've got this sample pad thing, and I thought about that thing that you did the other week. And, he'd pull up some sounds and just start whacking away on this sample pad. And then I would go, can you record that for me? And I'd take that away and sit at home and mess around with it. And we built a few songs that way. And so there was this renewed enthusiasm for the way we were doing things. I mean, we were still rehearsing really regularly, still really, workshopping ideas that way, but it was also where we started to, we were doing our homework a little bit more and not relying on how we'd traditionally done things in the past. So yeah, there was a newfound excitement because of that. And also around that time, that's when we sort of started getting involved in more shows with, the Birds, Robe bands and bands of that ilk that were around that time. And so we were started to get exposed to more bands that were doing different things, and that in itself was also inspiring. So yeah, there's a bit of a wave, I think, happening at the time, and we sort of managed to get back on that wave and sort of build from there again.
So we first saw Meniscus at Manly Fish shows, and then just by pure chance, there was another guy called Stu who was in a band called Nothing God, and through that Nothing God, he sort of put this collective between us, Anubis, Meniscus, and
Triangle, wasn't it? Right.
Triangle as well was another act that sort of played. But through that, we kind of started what would be considered a collective, but it was just a couple of shows.
Just a couple of shows.
Like Meniscus with Nothing God. And then obviously through that, Mike picked up.
Yeah, it was Cam Brennan went to Mike and said, he was the drummer of Meniscus at the time, and he went and said, look, this band is worth checking out. Also doing music similar to us, yeah. I loved Meniscus. I thought they were really intense and really it was a really powerful live band. And I've still got my copy of Absence of I on CD in my room.
Vastly different because, yeah, there were some songs that were a case of, hey, I've already written this, or sorry, we've already written this with Duncan. Can you now learn this, learn the parts, and we'll try and maintain the same overall structure and vibe. And for sometimes that didn't work, sometimes it didn't. So in the cases where it didn't necessarily translate well, we didn't rewrite the music, but we just allowed Cameron's own sort of spin on it, and then sort of built around that again. And then there were other ideas where it was a case of we had the melodic and chord structure, but we didn't have any drum ideas for it at all. And then Cameron got to essentially write his own parts for it. But a lot of the initial stuff for that album was a case of I would just program some beats, and my drum programming is atrocious. It's not realistic in the slightest, but I'm sort of trying to go, here's the vibe that I'm going for, and I'm hoping you as a drummer that understands how to hit things and keep in time can sort of figure out what I'm trying to go for here. And yeah, he always delivered. He took it home and he'd come back to the rehearsal and he'd play it his own way, but it would always be, you know, addressing that original idea that I had and sort of maintaining that. So that made the process a lot easier. And then the similar sort of thing, we just rehearsed and then got into the studio and we did all the drums in one day. And then took everything else, all the rest of the production up to this little space. And it was tiny. It was like a little booth with a little isolated booth that was mainly meant for vocalists. And I just brought my amps in there and shut the door and sat, you know, really, really close to the desk and we just worked through it that way and just sort of alternated between Alison and my parts and got it all done. Yeah, pretty quick. I think we did it all in about a week, all up. Around that time, and I can't remember how, you know, if it was either a year before that or a year after that, but around that time, we sort of started to notice that we had a bit of an audience when we stopped inviting our mates and relatives to come to our shows. Because, you know, you were so desperate to make up the numbers early on, you know, you don't want to be playing to a room of 3 people, so you know, you'd invite all your mates and stuff, and then the mates of the other bands would be there as well. So there'd be a smallish crowd there. And I think it got to the point where we stopped just inviting family and friends to come to our shows, and there was still a reasonable showing there. So that sort of coincided in around that time. But I think also a big part of that would have been the Birds Robe effect. I think because we started playing with bands that were more aligned to what we were doing. And then therefore more capable of sharing the audience. And, you know, a band, you know, you'd always have 3 or 4 bands playing and you're more than likely to have people arrive at the start and stay through to the end and not just leave after their band ends. So, you know, we'd play, you know, if we were on first or if we were on second or third or whatever, we'd you know, you'd find that the evening would just have a nice steady build of audience. And, you know, the mark that I always took as a good sign was that there was more people at the end of our set than what there was at the start of the set. So even if people didn't really know about us, they kind of were interested enough to stay to the end. And that was always a good sign, because the last thing you want to see is when you're on stage and you just see people just sort of like, I'm just going to go to the toilet, I'm just going to go have a drink at the bar, and just start sort of filtering away. So yeah, we you know, there was a regained confidence from knowing that, you know, there were at least a substantial minority of people out there that were enjoying what we were doing enough to, you know, stick around and, you know, buy a t-shirt or buy a CD at the end of the night.
Well, I think we played more shows with Meniscus than any other band, and we just had a perfect relationship with them. I think that our both of our musics, when it was Mish and Meniscus, they just went together hand in hand whenever we played a show.
Birds Robe, I mean, it's a lot of things now. I mean, when it started out, I sort of saw it as this tiny little, I I guess, label, if you'd want to call it that, of a group of like-minded bands, and just creating a bit of a platform so we can, you know, carve a little niche out in this scene that we've developed for ourselves. You know, obviously starting off in Sydney, but now it's expanded far beyond that. So, you know, it's many things, but to me, it's always been that little community of guys and girls that just love the same sort of stuff, and we just get off on each other's music, and we just wanted to get it out there, and you know, book shows where, you know, we can all play together and deliver what we think is, you know, really great music to as many people as we can.
I heard about them from the Sleepmakeswaves guys when we were trying to organise Robe shows and get the first prog fest happening. Tom, who was in Sleepmakeswaves at the time, would always rave about Meniscus. Otto, who wasn't even in Sleepmakeswaves yet, would just always rave about Meniscus. He'd say they're his favourite Sydney band, and you know, everyone would talk about this incredible guitarist, Dan Oreskovich, and you know, I was kind of like in my post Guns N' Roses Bon Jovi era, and I kind of couldn't understand what they meant by that, because I didn't really understand the qualities that post-rock guitarists necessarily had. And I was like, oh, you know, how good could a guitarist be? Like, are they shredding, you know, like a Slash or a Van Halen? Like, what's the deal? But I remember finally going to see Meniscus live at the Excelsior Hotel, and it was the first time ever that I got goosebumps from watching a guitarist play their instrument. I'm a drummer, and I'm always fixated on what the drummer is doing. And you know, Cameron, who became a great friend of mine, was an excellent drummer, and I was still kind of keeping one eye on him. But man, Dan was just unbelievable. Like, it's hard to look away from. He's going crazy, like amazing live energy, and you know, together with Alison, just this very unique feel and sound, you know, for a three-piece that I hadn't really heard before or since, to be honest. And so, you know, that solidified me as a Meniscus fan.
Yeah, I didn't know at the start how serious it was, and I guess maybe serious isn't the right word, but I mean, I met Mike, and I remember having a conversation with him before we released our second album, and he was chatting about you know, that this, you know, he's got this label, and this is what he's doing, and I just wasn't quite sure how serious he was, because you chat to a lot of people at shows, and people are always really enthusiastic, and they talk to you about these ideas, and a lot of the times people are just, you know, they're just being so nice, and I'm just like, is this guy just, you know, buttering me up? And you know, so I generally had no idea what sort of his vision was and what he was trying to do. So I was a little bit dismissive at first, only because, yeah, I just couldn't read. I couldn't read the situation. I didn't understand it, and I just thought, no, you know, we'll just do our own thing. We'll, you know, opportunities will come. We'll put out albums on our own and that sort of stuff. And you know, there were a couple of bands at the time that were working already fairly closely with Mike at that point. I mean, Sleepmakeswaves was one of the biggest obvious ones. And then, yeah, sort of, I think a couple of years went by, might have been maybe 2011, 2012, something like that. And then suddenly I was like, you know what, like, true to the guy's word, like, Mike's actually doing the stuff that he said he was going to do, and it only seemed to progress from there. And I'm like, you know, fair play. And so the next time we had a conversation, I was like, yeah, man, yeah, get us on board, 100%.
Meniscus were kind of doing their own thing for a while, and you know, that was cool, but all the other bands would always talk about Meniscus, wanting to play with Meniscus. Can you get Meniscus on a show? So, you know, whenever they did a Robe gig, it really felt special, and you know, they asked me to help book them their War of Currents album launch in July 2011, and that was a great night at Tone in Sydney.
Yeah, it was good. It was but yeah, initially it's one of those things, because you get people coming up to you going, oh, I'm so and so, I'm a promoter, and I book bands and I do this, and then you sort of read into a little bit and you're like, okay, maybe not. But no, Mike was definitely one of the genuine ones, even though it was a bit hard to sort of realise that at first, at face value.
Definitely makes him a rarity, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're taught to be a bit cynical, so yeah, it's natural. You naturally question people's intentions, but no, thankfully he's one of the good ones. And I said to him the other day, we were chatting via text, and I just said, you're one of the few like good eggs.
It was then that I think we started to work a bit more closely together, because I think their impression was that I didn't have the time because I was busy with Sleep Makes Waves and doing other stuff. But I made it very clear that I was a super fan, and anything they wanted me to help with, I'd love to help with. And so, from there we started working more closely on bookings, and helped a little bit with some Europe stuff for them, and getting support slots for them. And then eventually, when they got around to making the Refractions record and putting that out, we were a lot more closely aligned, from a kind of management perspective, with booking all the touring and releasing the record and doing all the marketing and PR.
There's definitely been that sort of sense of community that I think has been really important. And like I said before, there is an element of competition. I think that's always going to be there, and I think that's really good. But it's definitely been, for me, a source of, there's a camaraderie with a lot of the people that are in a lot of the bands that are involved in Bird's Robe, and also a sense of discovery, because I think I've always been the kind of person that I don't go too far out of my way to discover new music or bands or anything like that. So I do rely on, when I go to a show and it's the first and second support bands I've never heard of are the ones that usually blow me away, because I was like, I've never heard this before, this is amazing. And so yeah, having that sense of discovery has been really, really awesome. Like, it's been yeah, definitely eye-opening, and also like it's sort of enriched the experience along the way. About a year to 2 year gap. We'd already had released War of Currents just through ourselves. We didn't release it through Bird's Robe. It was just something we did on our own, and it was around that time, not long after that, that we started sort of engaging with Mike more directly and saying, hey, we've got some ideas, we've got some plans, we have no idea how to realise these ideas, so can you help us out? And Mike was immediately accommodating and was just super enthusiastic about it. So we then decided to release our original EP with a couple of songs that we, or with a song, sorry, that we left off, because we wanted to keep it a pretty tight record, and the songs were already quite long anyway. So we thought, let's chop a song off the end of it. Which coincidentally, the song that we chopped off was the title track of the EP. So the EP was called Absence of I, and the song that we left off was called Absence of I. So then we put that back on and released it as like a 6-track album, essentially, because it became about an hour's worth of music at that point. So we called that an album, and then we did that so we essentially had a Bird's Robe release that we could take to Europe and basically release over there and try and make a bit of a name for ourselves in that environment. First overseas tour as a band, I guess for a lot of people, would be a heavy mixture of absolutely terrifying moments, a lot of fun, a lot of stress, a lot of hilarious stories that weren't hilarious at the time but are now hilarious, It was fascinating because, you know, we went over there virtually unknown. And I'd say virtually unknown, probably 99.6% unknown. And whilst we had, at most of the shows, we had people come to the shows that knew us and came specifically to see us. You know, they were spread out across all the different cities and countries that we went to. So, you know, we played shows where the only people in the crowd were the bar staff and just some, you know, crusty old bloke that hangs around there every day. And then we did other shows where we had, you know, a substantial amount of people there, and we find out that, you know, a lot of these people were like, oh, we just like to go and see live music. We're not specifically going out to see a specific band or anything. It's just, this is, you know, we hear bands are playing. We just want to go check it out. And that experience was fairly common across most of Europe, particularly places like Germany and France, where there's you didn't have to have a name or be that well known for people to want to come out and watch live music. And I think that was where I thought it felt a little bit different to Australia, where we sort of tend to only go to shows where we know all the bands, right? And that's fair enough. You know, and we had instances where we had people, you know, walking past. They were coming from something. They were at a party, or they were. I think there was a football competition on at the time. I think the Euros were on. So I think like Germany was playing Italy or something, and so there was this big group of people on the streets that were passing one of these venues that we played in, and people just heard music and they just kind of wandered in, and this guy came in and spoke to us at the end of the night, and you just said, because one of the things I always ask people is, so like, how did you hear about our band, and what, you know, thank you for being here, but what brought you here? And he was like, I was watching the football at a pub, and I walking down the street and I heard some music, and I stuck my head around the corner and I heard you guys play, and I just said to my girlfriend, you have to go home without me. I have to go see this. Like, and you know, a super fan was born, and yeah, there were lots of cool stories like that. But you know, also being very inexperienced and not really understanding, I guess, how to tour. You know, you do. There were moments where, like, when things would become stressful, you know, like you're lost, or you've left a piece of gear behind or something, or you can't find a hotel, or you can't find the venue, or you get there and the guy that's meant to open up the venue's sick and he's not coming, and now you're scratching your head, is there even going to be a show? Or you know, miscommunications with the promoter, or the venue not quite understanding what type of band we were, and when we arrived they were like, oh, you're not acoustic, like, you know, there were those sorts of things. And that's part of the fun of the first tour, in that you're going to, you know, come across all that sort of stuff that you then eventually iron out with a bit of experience. So but no, it was I think we got out of it what we needed to, and I think it made us better musicians. It taught us to do more with less. You know, we weren't able to carry everything over that we would normally bring with us, and we had to economise and learn how to, just get the most out of every situation that we were in. And so whether we were playing to 5 people, or, you know, a few hundred people, or even at that, we played a festival in Germany called Fusion, and there were thousands of people there, and, you know, people were just sort of coming and going, and then sort of sticking around for our set, and that was, you know, mostly like electronic dance music and stuff, and we were this post-rock band playing like low-tuned droning walls of noise. So yeah, it was an amazing experience, and it definitely, you know, it was like we're so coming back. This is absolutely, we're doing this again. Yeah, so the tour with Caspian came about, and yeah, Cam was drumming for us, and you know, I heard of the band enough to sort of know what they were about. I wouldn't say I had an extensive knowledge of all of their music. I knew like a couple of tracks, and there was the ones at the new album at the time that sort of stick with me. And we went, it was one of those things. It was the first time we'd sort of done a committed national tour with an international artist. So a lot of like, we weren't quite sure what it was going to be like, and you hear stories about touring acts, and you just wonder what are these people going to be like, and how big are the egos going to be, and all that sort of stuff. And we got along really well with those guys, and they were just I'm sure if you ask any person that's played with them or been part of their shows, like they'll all say the same thing, and they were just incredible down-to-earth guys that were just really passionate about what they were doing. And I think also when bands from other countries come to Australia, it's a significant financial investment for them. We're not a big market, so more often than not, you're coming here to at best break even. So I think they came with an idea of this is an experience and we're just going to enjoy it. And we were just happy to be along for the ride, to be honest. I mean, we got to play some venues we'd never been to before, and it was the first time Meniscus went to Perth. I think at that point, when we were playing shows and we were being exposed to other bands' audiences, and we were seeing that the reaction that they were having to us, it was really exciting. I thought, okay, we're at a point where we're writing stuff that people are getting into, and now it's just a matter of just getting in front of as many faces as we can, and so that tour was really a kicker to try and push on again, and get back into a writing environment, and try to basically do what we need to do so we can do more of these tours again, and go back overseas and stuff like that.
Well, we played with Meniscus when we were down there. Fucking outstanding band. They blew us away every single night. Haven't talked to those guys in a while. But yeah, they were our first encounter with Bird's Robe, and like just amazing people, amazing band. Our first touch with Australia was that band.
Started at the top.
Exactly. Yeah. Love those guys. Yeah.
And around that time, Cameron was considering starting a family, and whilst he was very much committed to the band, he sort of you could sort of start to see that, okay, well there's only so much I can do now. Alison and I were still very much like, no, we're all in. We're gonna, we want to keep rolling, and it was just a case of just sort of laying down what the future would look like, and whether that was going to work for everyone. We all really loved Cam, and we didn't necessarily want him to leave the band, but we were sort of like, hey, like I want to keep rehearsing regularly. I want to keep doing this. I want to, and he was just about to have his first child, and I was just like, I don't, it's up to you. Like if you want to still go down this path. But I think he then sort of like took a step back and went, actually like yeah, fair enough. I think I need to step out on this one. Another period of, what are we doing? Are we, should we stop now, or do we find another drummer and keep going? But we started to audition again, This time we got Mike involved in helping us go through that process, and that's how we landed on Alex O'Toole from Captain Kickarse.
Yeah, absolutely. So the opportunity to join Meniscus was, again, out of left field. I didn't see that coming, and I respected these guys and girls. Alison, Dan, and Cameron, and Marty as well, all are so good at what they do. So I was worried. I was worried I wouldn't succeed in the audition.
Yeah, well, they were super polished, hey?
Oh, yeah.
Whereas perhaps Captain was not. So
No.
they really had their shit together. They were very pro on stage.
Really slick.
And they just kind of, they did their homework, hey? It was good. Not that we didn't, but they did it in a better way. It was good. Not a better way, but they did it in a different way.
And thankfully they didn't mind having a gross, sweaty, long-haired space cadet drummer. Little did I know I would fit in well. They had their sights set on touring, and their drummer recognised at the point he was at life, growing family, other kind of commitments, meant that a Europe tour was completely out of his scope and he wasn't going to be able to do it. They wanted to have somebody to join the band, firstly with the thing in mind to be able to do this tour, but also to be able to complete the recording project that they had under the way. They wanted to be touring with an album under their belt to be able to do it. So the invitation to audition for Meniscus came from Mike from Robe. They were interested in having me join, but we weren't sure if it was going to sound right when we were in the room together. So we went from there. I prepared some songs for the audition. I got called back to a second, potentially a third audition, and Marty Wong, who's the person who does the projections and video art for Meniscus, artwork, website, all of that. He arrives, which first of all was out of the ordinary. He usually isn't at the rehearsals. He was like, "Oh, hey man, yeah, great, good to see you. This isn't an audition anymore, right?" It's like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, do you want a beer?" And that was it. I was in Meniscus from then on in. You didn't know this. At that point, the pretense was that it was still an audition, but that was a welcome to the band, and that was lovely.
And he was just one of those things where gave him a bunch of music, rocked up to the rehearsal studio. The first 30 seconds of the first song we played, I was like, this is the guy, 100% this is the guy. Because he brought pretty much everything that we needed to in terms of his ability to execute what we had already done. So in essence, giving him material to perform, but also having his own flair. Incredibly tight, but awesome groove, awesome chops. And there was that spark of excitement when he played with us. And I remember Mike actually sat in on that session, and just sitting at the couch at the back of the rehearsal in the room that we were in, and I was just playing, and I looked at him, and he just looked at me, and he just kind of, like, eyes wide open, like kind of just nodding like, this is good. So thankfully, although, I'd imagine a fair amount of time had elapsed by that point, going from Cam to Alex joining the band and us starting to put together material for the next record, it felt like the wheels just started to get in motion very quickly at that point. We were all like committed and excited and really motivated again.
So my thoughts in the lead up to ultimately joining Meniscus were concerns that my vibe, my thing on the drums may not be suitable for the band. Cameron, who is the drummer on the War of Currents album, is really calculated, had lots of interesting, like, delicate cymbal work, lots of ornamental cymbals, like really kind of Neil Peart inspired. And I'm kind of like a hitting crashes and playing fast guy. That's, yeah, with Captain interested in time signature changes and juxtaposing weird bits together. Meniscus, I find they're a journey band. They're this epic builds and then intensity at the crescendo, at the top part. So I wasn't exactly sure how that would work. I went into it like kind of with a lot of respect, not wanting to be out of place, didn't want to be the sore thumb. And found out along the way that that was a needless concern. From the start, Dan and Ali were both really supportive of, no, we want you to be comfortable, you do your thing, please contribute your own energy, your own thoughts and ideas to our album. Be a part of the band, not be the hired drummer. The thing I found attractive about being in Meniscus, about the potential for joining Meniscus, was to be able to contribute to something that was slick. You know, Meniscus, they've always had this sheen on them, which comes from having a full-time projectionist. They always were able to be kind of like a whole package, sonically, visually, amazing, stimulating. They could really draw you in as an audience member, and that was my sole way of experiencing them at that point, as an audience member. So that was attractive. Thinking, oh, cool, I could contribute to their vision, that would be nice. I felt playing the parts exactly as the other drummers had played them would be difficult. Found out that's not exactly what was needed along the way. So yeah, just being able to join a slick unit, it's like getting a promotion. Yeah, so it was straight down to business, really, when I joined Meniscus. We went, so there was already some demoing that had started with Cameron, with the previous drummer. Dan was good at documenting ideas in the rehearsal space. There was the invitation to take these seeds of ideas and grow them however worked. We rehearsed a lot. We would do 8-hour rehearsals on Sundays. We did big writing sessions. I was keen on doing big stuff like that. We'd been seriously demoing for Grim Repercussions, and I really valued that process. I liked getting into details and revising, you know, these 6-8 second sections of music to make sure they were exactly what we wanted before locking it in and moving on. And Meniscus was, you know, working in a similar way. Let's get exactly what we want going. Let's try and realize each idea for what it is. Let's lock that in and then record that and present it in a way that does justice to the idea. And I feel like they're a band of big ideas.
In between the two albums, we recorded a single, just one song, which didn't live on any record. It was called DBT, and that was with Cam. And in that session, we recorded 2 other songs that we never ended up finishing because we just thought we're just going to keep this as a single. And the other 2 were kind of like I just wanted to see, you know, how this would turn out. And then it was around the time that Cam left. So those other 2 tracks that never made it into anything were, I guess, a skeleton for what we would then bring into the next record. But alongside of that, I then, at that point in time, started writing music basically from the ground up in a computer. And I'd sit there with my guitar and record riffs and stuff. So Refractions was very much a case of completely written songs. Now I just need someone to lay the drums to it. There was some songs that were written with Cam that got either more or less, you know, 75-80% copied and then tweaked along the way. And then there were other ideas that we completely spontaneously came out in a rehearsal room and jammed them out. And so that formed the basis of the record. So I think it's almost like every other way we've written songs in the past, it had an element of all those things. And I think if you listen to the record now, and I listened to it a few months back again, there's a very, in my you know, my ears when I hear it, there's very clear songs that sound far more structured and considered, and then there's more organic, jammy, sort of more just kind of free-flowing stuff. And I think they're a really good representation of the 2 different approaches, or 3 different approaches we had when we were writing that album.
So in the lead up to the release of Refractions, we were pumped. Meniscus was stoked. We were really proud with the album. It sounded fantastic. We were really happy with the choice of personnel that we had on board. Simon, who recorded, who engineered for us. Ron from Tangled Thoughts of Leaving, who did such an amazing job with the mixing. We liaised back and forth, and I was liaising quite a lot. Dan had faith in, you know, my ears for feedback with creating mixes and settling on mixes. Ron and I communicated extensively, and he put up with a lot. He did such a great job. So we wanted to be able to release this record. We were ready. We were overall excited about it.
You know, Refractions, that was also completely different again. There was, you know, songs in there that just have so much more energy, and then you've got your, you know, chill out sections. It was just like every single album that we've had, we've been able to kind of tell a different story. So it's not just, you know, we're not just trying to rehash, you know, some old songs. We're like, it's like a journey of like us as people, and musically as well.
Yeah, so it very much was all a very condensed period of time. I was working in a job where I was, I mean, it was one of those jobs where it was quite mindless for me. I was sort of just plugging away, doing spreadsheets, and I was like, I need to somehow make music a bigger part of my life than what it is now. And yeah, so when the opportunity came around to have a jam with the sleepmakeswaves guys, I immediately thought, well, awesome, I'll definitely give it a go. I thought about it at the time. I was thinking, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it all work, but I'm certainly going to at least put my name in the hat and just see what happens. But I was committed to, you know, growing that sort of part of my life that was dedicated to music. So, and you know, I was trying to leave the day job a bit more on autopilot at that point. And Yeah, so, and you know, at the same time we were also doing the building blocks, which would be the Refractions album for Meniscus. So, but I think having the opportunity to play with a band that was, you know, obviously knew the guys, I knew what they were about, stylistically in the same wheelhouse. So it wasn't going to be a complete departure from the things that I was used to. So I think, like, conceptually it would be fairly easy to do both things. And so yeah, went along for a couple of auditions.
When Kid decided to leave Sleep Makes Waves, it was a real big moment for the band. I think there was so much going on that Tim, Otto and Alex really wanted to continue. But Kid had such a unique way of approaching the instrument and the songs that it was going to be a real task to find someone that could fill those shoes. We spent weeks and weeks auditioning people. We invited a lot of guitarists from in the post-rock scene, outside the post-rock scene. We were contacted by a couple people in some quite well-known bands, and also session players as well who were absolute shredders. And the guys took their time with everyone, did an audition with everyone that submitted, and there were some real great players. But Dan stood out. And I think those who've seen Dan play and know what he's capable of, that makes sense. But it was an interesting process because there were a couple of guys that we invited back for a second audition. The first audition with Dan went really well.
The first time round, it was just a case of, I don't know what I'm doing here. These guys are like serious. They're a serious band. I don't even know how to play their songs properly. This is just going to be an absolute disaster. I'm just going to embarrass myself. And so you have this constant battle, which I imagine lots of creative people go through, and that's, you have this ego, and then you have this crippling anxiety, and you have this imposter syndrome, and this like, but I'm really good. And it's like, no, you're not. And you battle with that. Yeah, so the first audition, I thought I'd just play the parts.
And he played the songs great, and it was a good vibe. But I think because everyone had seen Meniscus and knew what Dan was capable of, they were kind of expecting a bit more from him, and maybe unfairly expecting more from him than from other people. And part of that was just kind of the energy. And I think Alex called Dan and said, hey, that was great. I think we all want you to be the guy. We'd just like to see, some of that energy that you bring with Meniscus. And I spoke to Dan, and I think it was probably, from Dan's perspective, I think he just had to make the decision that he really wanted to do it and to be in that band.
Then came back for another audition, and then I was like, this is totally the wrong approach. Like, I'm not thinking about this the right way at all. It's just like, approach this as if, and how I've always thought about any show that I've ever done is it's like, this could be your last gig ever. You get hit by a bus tomorrow. And then we kicked in, and then I just left it all in the room, and I think the guys all resonated with it, and yeah, they were keen to have me on board.
I think once he made that decision, I mean, that second audition with Dan was possibly one of the greatest performances that I've ever seen. I mean, he came in like an absolute whirlwind. Just from the get-go, I think the first track that they played was Stars from the Love of Cartography album. And he was just going mental from the first riff. And I'm sitting in the corner of the room, I'm looking at Alex, I see Alex's eyes go wide because he can see the energy absolutely pouring off Dan in the first 5 to 10 seconds. And Alex, once the riff kicks in, Alex is headbanging so low I was worried his head was going to hit the pedal board. Otto is kind of beside himself because, his guitar hero is jamming with him at full Meniscus level energy. And, he's going off. And Tim is always kind of head down on the drums, but I kind of look at him and I can see that he's smiling, like he knows exactly what's going on, and he's going harder as well. And yeah, honestly, like I started tearing up, like my eyes were all watery and I was just grinning and like, you know, honestly, after the first 30 seconds of the song, there wasn't any need to do anything else, but they still made him play like the full 20 minutes of material, just for fun, basically. Yeah, Dan being in Sleep Makes Waves was an incredible time. I think, you know, the energy that he brought and the level of musicianship that he brought to the material was phenomenal. And, you know, he was really committed and professional. And, you know, I'm glad that we got to kind of give him an experience of touring America and touring with Cog through Australia and doing all these headline shows, playing with bands like The Contortionist and Tangled Thoughts Are Leaving, and you know, getting to do a whole bunch of festivals and things that you know, he otherwise might not have gotten to do.
To answer whether it was a permanent thing, I guess at that point in time, at that moment in time, I was thinking, okay, this could be one of those things where I just may be here for a while, and then, you know, kid might, you know, want back in at some stage, in which case I'll just happily step aside. But at the same time, once we got going, and once we sort of started planning shows and getting into that real sort of grind of the tour and stuff, I was definitely like 100% in that moment, and like, no, I see myself as a part of this, and but, you know, at the same time, I was also trying to keep a job and do my own band, and also, you know, keep the wife happy, and so it got to a point where it became really, really challenging to do all those things. And as much as I thought the sky was the limit with these guys, I sort of had a bit of a reality check, and I went, I don't actually think I would be able to sustain this for a long period of time unless something significantly changed. And yeah, I don't think my sort of ability to commit going forward was gonna mesh with these guys who had, you know, very driven and very lofty ambitions. So had to step away. But, you know, the beauty of it is we got to do some really cool things together, and, you know, touring the US, you know, was a bit of a bucket list thing that I was able to do, and got to record an album with the guys that I'm really proud of. And you know, that couple of year span that we worked together, I thought was really, really awesome. And I learned a lot as well, like even just as a musician, because I was first time playing in a band with another guitar player. So I was always, you know, responsible for all of the sort of 6-string sonic territory. And then being in an environment where now there was that interplay with another guitarist and sort of learning how things fit into that space was really, really cool. Also got to, you know, Alex and Tim are just phenomenal at rhythm section, and Tim was one of those like super inspiring drummers to play with. And yeah, I could sit there, and there's one of the songs I remember where I'm doing something quite repetitive for quite a while. I'm just like kind of droning on a note, and like you just sort of forget. I'm not this part I'm not thinking about. I'm just like watching this guy absolutely hammer the drum kit and just like bopping in time, and just going, man, this is just so awesome. So there were lots of those moments along the way, which I look back on really, really fondly.
When he made the decision to leave, it was completely understandable. You know, Meniscus needed Dan's full attention, and his family needed his full attention. And I think, you know, he'd kind of seen what the other side of the fence looked like, and was grateful for that perspective, but decided that it wasn't for him. And so it was disappointing to see him go, but you know, I'm really glad that you know, we had that moment in time with him. And, you know, I think very grateful to him as well. He stepped in at a time where the band really needed someone to be able to commit to weeks and weeks and weeks of touring overseas and doing laps around Australia and making a new record. And he stepped up and filled a spot that honestly, it was very hard to envisage anyone being able to fill the shoes that Kid had left in the guitarist spot in Sleep Makes Waves. And so, yeah, what he did for everyone, you know, was a really important thing. So, yeah, very grateful to Dan for that.
And so cool that Meniscus and Sleep Makes Waves had this like connective tissue as well. That's another like a thing that we sort of helped happen. But yeah, on their own, Meniscus. Oh, and Captain Kickarse too. Like it all weaves together. You know, Alex playing drums for them in the end, and
there's this inherent aspect of a musician's life that you've got several projects going on. It fit in. Like, you know, I had to make time for Meniscus in my schedule with Captain Kickarse, at the time with Face Command, with Mostronics, with Eleanor Dunlop, with you know, occasional other gigs that would come up. Managing time, managing your different projects was just part of it. So when we heard that Dan had the opportunity to join Sleep Makes Waves and go and, you know, waltz through America with this incredible lineup of other acts, we were stoked for him. We knew it would be a lot. He was exhausted, but you know, that's what he does. Dan works really hard, whether it's you know, behind a guitar or behind a desk. He's all out. I don't feel like there was any problem with that. I don't think that the efforts for creating and realizing the ideas were inhibited. It's one of those other things you do as a musician. You can segment your ideas and your directions project by project. The Captain Kickarse repertoire didn't seep into Meniscus. For Dan, I don't think the Meniscus thing seeped into Sleep Makes Waves, except for, you know, the stage presence. That's something that's going to be there when you're actually in the same room. But when we're talking about writing parts, creating repertoire, performing repertoire, that's just managed. That's part of being the musician.
Seeing Dan with Sleep Makes Waves, one of the highlights of my musical life. Seeing those gigs, unbelievable. Like all my Christmases coming at once. Dan leaving, I understood it. Dan's got a family, he's got Meniscus, he's got responsibilities. And Sleep Makes Waves is consuming, and sometimes it's difficult to have both. So I understood his choice. I didn't like his choice, but I understood it, I respected it, and that was his decision to make, you know, based on his needs. So that was the Dan situation, but I'm grateful that the moment happened when it did. I'm grateful I got the opportunity to see them, and I'm grateful that Dan is now part of Sleep Makes Waves lore, because Meniscus has always been part of Sleep Makes Waves and Robe lore as an integral part.
I mean, look, you're not going to be booking shows at the same time. But to be fair, because we're in that cycle of leading up to record and release an album, we weren't really playing that many shows to begin with. So there wasn't a sense of needing to really do much less. I guess where I felt things had slowed down was my just the mental capacity and being able to think about the band and think about things. But the good part of being in that sort of touring environment is because it's an incredibly sort of repetitious thing, and there's a lot of downtime, like so much downtime, and you know, whether you're sitting on a bus driving to the next city, or you're sitting there at a venue 2 hours before you're supposed to sound check or something like that. There's just a lot of time where you can just sort of sit there and think about stuff. So I was definitely squirreling away and sort of writing myself notes about things that I wanted to try and do when we got back. But I guess where I think doing the Sleep Makes Waves stuff really helped was doing things with a band that had reached what I consider a pretty high level of success in our realm. There were things along the lines of just general managing your day-to-day and just how a band organises themselves and how they assign roles and responsibilities and just all the kind of mechanics behind the scenes other than how they play music. And I took a lot of inspiration from that, and that was, you know, that really helped when we came back and we were starting to focus on putting together, you know, what the release was going to look like for the Meniscus album and what the tours would look like. And so I already had these really good ideas of, you know, what not to do and what to do, you know, when trudging through that swamp. So yeah, I'd say on the whole it was hugely beneficial. It did come at a cost. My health took a bit of a downturn, sort of at around the end of 2017 after I'd done all the sleepmakeswaves stuff, done a bunch of tours with them, then went over to Europe with Meniscus, and I came back and lost 10 kilos and yeah, was just struggling to get out of bed. So my health just went down the toilet pretty quickly, and I think that was the moment where I'd sort of, you know, the decision to not try and pursue both bands was probably a good one, because I don't think my body was going to be able to keep up. So I had to take, you know, quite a few months out of basically doing nothing other than sitting on a couch. So thankfully that's all okay now. That was only just a small blip at the end of a pretty full-on year. So, but yeah, it was amazing. Like I can't even believe that it all happened in such a condensed period of time. Like, it was a significant amount of touring and shows and recording and.
One aspect of pre-production when we're looking towards the release of Refractions was creating a film clip. We decided to make a clip for Overhang, and Marty had this grand idea of projections occurring around the band on hexagonal screens. So we're used to playing in front of a backdrop and having projections right there in a square, like a pretty standard movie screen kind of presentation. This was immersive. He built in the garage at Marrickville, decked out the entire thing, this meters wide immersive kind of staging that he was able to map several projectors onto for the filming of this clip. When we locked in the Manning bar for our album launch, Marty wasn't cool to go back to the rectangular screen behind it. He went all out. Found the one production company in the country that had these LED hexagons, these modular hexagons that could come together to form a screen. It's one of the best looking shows, probably the best looking Australian show that I've ever been a part of with Meniscus.
The backdrop that Marty had made for Overhang, I wish we could take that with us everywhere. Like, that was just so cool. Yeah, again, packed house, super awesome vibes. Like, it was another huge accomplishment for us, and to see everyone really digging the new songs was really cool.
It was next level. Really great. Same sort of thing, like I was saying before, when I was worried about joining the band and why I was motivated to join the band, it was slick. And the visual presentation is a huge part of that. We're really proud of that show.
fact that we got to all play the Dunk Festival together, which would probably be the biggest. Well, it's definitely the biggest thing Meniscus has done in terms of a one-off show. The fact that there were 3 Aussie bands doing it, we all more or less got to play on the same day in the big stage in the big room, and just sort of that realization when you were like, wow, there's a couple of thousand people here that are all into this stuff, and so you immediately got that warmth and energy from the crowd right from the beginning. You didn't have to win anyone over. It was there, and it was electric. It was loud as hell, and so much fun. So
it just had this magical charm about it. Even just driving there was just beautiful scenery, and even when we parked, you had to kind of walk through trees to get into the venue. It just had such a good vibe. Everyone was so friendly. It was just the best environment ever. So for it to be going back there, I'm super pumped.
On the whole, it was a huge step up from the previous tour. But when things step up as well, you also have new challenges along the way, and bits of drum kits go missing, or you by the end of it, sometimes you're just tired. You got like 4 shows left. You've been on the road for 5 weeks. It becomes really, really difficult. And then all of a sudden you're like, little things that, didn't bother you at all of a sudden start bothering you, I threw my guitar more times than what I care to remember, out of just frustration over something that now I look back and go, why were you so angry about that? A fold-back wedge would blow and just be this horrible farty sound just coming at you, and like trying to tell the guy on the side that doesn't speak English to turn that off, because it's just, and then it's like, rah, just get the guitar and just like throw it. So that stuff happened. But these are all funny stories now. It's all part of that journey. So good times.
We fell in love with Meniscus on tour when we toured with them in 2017. They work horses. They put us in our place after 5 days of us drinking and partying and then dicking about and fucking up on stage, and then they got up and just were consistently good every night.
The 2017 tour, the Europe tour that we did with We Lost the Sea, was just incredible. It was like, for me, bucket list kind of thing. It was my first international tour, first time playing a festival main stage of that size, as being the feature. It was an onslaught, it was close to a full month of doing it. I think we calculated close to 20,000 kilometers. It was the real deal. Super exciting. It was really positive. It was a grueling couple of weeks while we got there. I got really sick. Had to, deal with having low energy and not being on my A game for 2 out of the 3.5 weeks. Feeling great when we were getting to the back end, and I had my energy back, and I was able to really tap into the energy that got thrown our way in places like Bordeaux and Paris. In Rome as well, we had really interesting shows through Italy, but the cherry on the cake for all of that was definitely Dunk Festival. Dunk and Birds Robe have this, it's a perfect kind of union. They have such a good and well-deserved reputation in the post-rock world and the experimental world, and getting into the post-metal kind of thing in Europe, that they've become the festival to play as a post-rock band. So to have the invitation to play that, it felt like a privilege. And on the day that we actually played it, the privilege was realised. It was insane. Personal highlight, career highlight.
Dunk 2017 would have to be right up there. So we had Dumbsaint, Meniscus, We Lost the Sea, almost back to back really, on one day. that was pretty awesome because I'm mates with all those bands as well. So just to see those guys on such a huge stage with like the lighting setup that, you know, the guy that did the lighting does Tomorrowland. So it's like insane lighting, nearly blew the camera up. But like, yeah, like that was just such a memorable day. And it felt really triumphant for all those guys.
I just remember being so scared before playing. Just the energy of the crowd as well, like, you know, they were just so supportive.
The good thing about that festival was like there was just a real community vibe to it, and like the locals were so excited to see those three bands. Like, you know, the kind of humble beginnings over here, like, you know, at that stage, none of them were playing anything bigger than, you know, the occasional Oxford Art Factory. So to go over there where they were actually, you know, that was one of the big bands that those were the bands that they'd waited and hoped to see. So it was pretty cool.
I think by like show 3, we realised that as we're drinking and partying pretty hard, I think we had a bum show maybe 3 or 4 nights in, and just seeing Meniscus for those 3 or 4 nights just like kill it and not let whatever was happening, whatever was going wrong, whatever argument was happening, whatever thing had gone wrong in load-in or sound check, whatever effect the 110% they gave. And I remember us having a conversation and we're just like, guys, we need to lift our game. We need to be better. We need to be tighter. We need to perform better. This needs to be like a, you know, people have been waiting to see us, or people are coming to see us, and they deserve to get 110% from us. And, you know, this is like a cool time and a bit of a holiday, but maybe it needs to be taken a little bit more seriously. And so I think we learned so much from them. And
touring Europe with them made, no matter what happened that day, I could count on watching Meniscus play, more specifically watching Alex play with Meniscus, and everything of the day would be erased by watching that band. They're just like, they're it for me. They're perfect. They're a perfect band.
The pinnacle of going on tour with them to Europe and just being able to share the stage with them every night for almost 3 weeks was, for me personally, really, really humbling experience, because it was like, you know, we've done something that we can put on the same, we can kind of hold up against what we saw them do and feel like, yeah, we're doing this as equals, but also celebratory moment, because it's like, look at what we as a collective in a scene, if you like, of Australian, you know, experimental rock bands can do. You know, we can go internationally and put on these amazing shows, and every night, like, and you know, Alex and Dan and Alison just putting on such phenomenal energy into their performances every night.
We definitely leveled up. It's
Yeah.
what the band's continued to do as well. We always find ourselves in the fortunate position that we're with another band that's that level of profession above us, and we get to learn from other people. And
yeah, and they're a phenomenal live band. Phenomenal live band.
Their whole album is just the soundtrack to my life for that
I don't
period
think
of time.
it hasn't left my car since I got back from Europe in 2017.
It's always a pleasure to listen to. Throws me back.
Yeah, but that tour, I think we learned so much, and definitely with like the Meniscus guys. I mean, yeah, and so we got to do some really cool shit, play heaps of cool shows, had a really great time, and that tour was like a really big learning curve for us. And I think that
the lessons we learned on that tour we have taken with us everywhere we go since, and that's basically down to Meniscus.
Couple of things stick out. The crowds were bigger, the venues were bigger. There was more fervent support, and I guess there was probably less of a case of the audience being made up of people that were just newly discovering the bands, and there were a lot more hardcore support, you know, guys that came already in the t-shirts and had their bag full of all the things that they wanted autographed and stuff. So that was one thing. Secondly, touring with two other Australian bands brought a completely different vibe to the whole thing, and it was almost like lads on holiday sort of thing. It was there was an immediate comfort in having people that speak your language, that grew up in the same sort of places that you did, and we all liked the same stuff. And whilst we weren't particularly close with any of the guys in the other bands, we all knew each other, you know. But we were able to forge some pretty awesome friendships, and you know, we had to get over that initial awkwardness of, you know, we don't really know these guys. Should we try and hang out, or do we just kind of keep to ourselves? And we're playing a show in, I think it was Leipzig in Germany, and just sitting at the back. It was just one of those 2-3 hours of downtime, and I just wandered right over to the We Lost the Sea guys and just sat down. I just like, I don't really like talking about music and bands. I'm a pretty normal, boring guy, and it's like, what TV shows are you into and stuff, you know? Do you guys play video games? You know, and so we're able to sort of break that ice pretty early on in the tour, and then it just became a case of, yeah, just mates playing shows, and because we were more or less travelling together and arriving at the same places at the same time, and meeting up. A lot of that anxiety around what happened in the first tour, where we're like, we don't know where we're going, we don't know who we're supposed to be meeting, we don't know this person, we don't know that, we don't know any of the support bands or anything. This was like, it was always going to be, you know, the three bands. It was always going to be, you know, we became very familiar with each other's sets and how the flow. We knew when bands were having a really good night. We knew when we were having a tough night, and there was this sort of level of comfort that sort of came with sort of taking that all over Europe. You know, and then on the occasion that we'd have a day off somewhere, you know, we'd hang out in Budapest or something, and then we'd just, you know, run riot, and, you know, don't have to worry about, you know, playing the show. We could just sort of sit down and have a beer and just, you know, and yeah, just have a good time.
I didn't know what to expect. You know, I've spent years playing pretty small shows and being cool with that. Was happy for that to be the level of the shows that we were playing. I knew that Duncan, when we played Cobra Fest over in Budapest as well, that was going to be pretty good. You know, festival lineups, we were expecting good things for that. But just the average shows, really engaged people who wanted to buy every piece of merch, people who had driven from the next country over because we weren't playing Switzerland, coming and like offering us biscuits because they're good with tea and it's representative of our country. It was insane. It was, yeah, like so much better than expected. And, you know, like having the lineup, We Lost the Sea, Meniscus, Dumbsaint, like the Inner West goes on tour. We were comfortable. We were happy to be spending time. We didn't feel like out of place. We were like, we made a little bit of a family. We're super tight with those guys still. It's cool to see that Solkyri and We Lost the Sea are enjoying the same sort of thing as well. They've just had a super successful tour, another one coming up. Yeah, same sort of thing. And then every night, no matter how big the previous night was, no matter how hard the drive was from one country to the next, every set they delivered. Yeah, professionalism as well as fun.
Yeah, we played with them. It was in France. What was the name? I can't remember. There was some festival we played with them. Another great band.
Played a show with them in France, in a church that had been converted into a venue, I believe. Might have been Metz. Again, a band I'd only heard of a little bit. I'd heard bits and pieces. Never really sat down and listened to everything that they'd done. but again, a similar effect seeing them live and being totally blown away. And I think that's I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but I think that's the key thing with so many of these bands is that they're meant to be live. It's meant to be a live thing. It's meant to be a bunch of people on a stage creating music with their instruments and an audience hearing that. And I think it's really hard to get that on a record or a Spotify playlist or something when you're on a train or something.
So coming back from the tour was like it was a long way down. It was a long way to come down from the heights and being the tour, to go from like this almost dream tour to coming down and getting back into our workaday reality. There was a couple of weeks where, you know, we just needed to recover personally. We came back together and reflecting on a couple of things that happened on tour, thinking about the like causes of tension and the things that occurred on tour. That when we discussed them, kind of the tensions arose again, made peace with each other. There was, and still is, the intention to write more, to play more, and write again at the same time. Dan and Ali are expecting a child, and same sort of thing. When Dan does something, he does it all out. He's preparing for this. We get together every now and then, we figure out how we're going to be able to do the next step. COVID comes in. So that's right when we had plans to get back into the rehearsal space every couple of weeks. We're not allowed to see our friends anymore. We're not allowed to leave a 5-kilometre radius. That's put a big delay on things. We're still coming out of that, and everyone comes out at their own pace. So let's see what happens. There's definitely opportunity for progress and for new things to happen, particularly with support of Bird's Robe. Who knows? Let's see what comes through.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I guess you could call it a hiatus, but sort of we, being 3 people that, were working full-time jobs and were trying to play shows on the weekend. I guess the hiatus for us was really just us going about our normal day-to-day lives. It wasn't like we're on this break. It was just, and it wasn't a conscious decision. A certain amount of time just elapses when you focus on certain things. Alison and I started a family a couple of years ago, so we've got 2 little kids running around the house, so that's definitely slowed things down in that regard. I'm sort of reverting to what I was doing prior to Refractions, in that very much just trying to craft songs in the bedroom at home. So the aim is essentially to have enough material where I can basically, engage with the rest of the guys and go, okay, now let's pull together and work on this and get a release happening. So the plan is definitely another album. And, I guess in contrast, we won't be playing in a rehearsal room a few nights a week, fleshing the songs out that way. It's going to be a little bit different because we just have to adapt to the environment that we're in. And so now it's a lot of late nights with the headphones on when everyone's asleep, and I'm just sort of trying not to hit the strings too hard, and come up with a body of material that we can then springboard into what will be the next album. And in terms of shows, 2024's looking like a good time to get back on it. I think the COVID thing really, starting a family was one thing, and then COVID happened on top, and then sort of I started thinking, live music might not be the same. We might not have what we had previously, and if the amount of music venues that we were already losing, even when live music was strong, suddenly things look a lot more precarious. So, we played a show literally like a week before the very first lockdown. We played at the Manning Bar supporting Mono. Oh, sorry, not the Manning Bar. The name escapes me. Metro. The Metro, thank you. And that was like literally right as it was kicking off, and then that was I think the last show we did. So it's been a while. But yeah, the plan is definitely to get back on it. And we're now sort of logistically trying to work out, if we did things like a national tour, what would that look like? Could we, we might have to, Alison, for instance, might have to stay home, and we might have to get a fill-in to do some of the more further away shows and things like that. But we can work that stuff out. That's only a small obstacle. So we can, definitely look forward to getting back on the road and doing some more shows.
pumped. Yeah, really looking forward to it, and really looking forward to potentially playing some new music. It's been a long time since we've played something new, so you get into that comfortable kind of feeling of what you're doing on stage, so you don't have to worry about it. So it's going to be a little bit daunting as well. And then seeing everyone's reactions, you hope it goes well and everyone likes it. But in the same aspect, it's like you just got to do it and just have fun with it and roll with it. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I got to hit the gym and get dig fit.
Yeah.
Because 40 odd minutes of
Well, everyone
headbanging and jumping around on stage.
everyone expects that high energy. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta get fit so I can deliver.
We just need some springs on your shoes or something.
Yeah.
Get some Air Jordans so you can jump around.
Air Force Ones.
Love that band. They've been such a huge influence on so many other bands that people know and love. Sleep Makes Waves, We Lost the Sea, Solkyri, and countless other bands around the world as well. So yeah, I'm just so stoked to know them and be able to call them friends, and have got to see them so many times being in Australia. And yeah, if you haven't seen a Meniscus show or listened to a Meniscus record, you got to do it. It's essential listening, especially if you're a post-rock fan. You have to.
We love you, Alex. Thank you for covering our arse in Europe.
Alex is a really cool drummer and a really cool guy.
I feel like this kind of music is my life. This is my personality coming through my instrument. It's not an accident that I play music like this, that I play math rock, I play post rock, that I'm interested in progressive kinds of things. I like to choose the things that I look at, choose the things that, the places where I put myself. Spending time by the ocean is a huge part of that as well. The types of music that I listen to and the kind of feelings that I get from that music. Like it's, you have enough time over years and decades to really figure out who you are. And this kind of music is who I am. What's coming up, what's going to be in the next couple of years, couple of decades. Hopefully more of the same.